I focus on management of cattle really from the moment they're weaned uh, until they're hanging upside down on a hook. It's a pretty wide area of beef cattle science to be
You bet.
involved in. I think of myself as really a beef cattle production scientist. And so if it fits in that realm, really from even pre-weaning, management of calves pre-weaning until they are hanging upside down at the beef packer, we really focus our research um, um, portfolio in that space.
Welcome to the Feed Science Podcast. I'm Adam Fahrenholz, coming to you from North Carolina State University's Animal Food Manufacturing Program and the Prestige Department of Poultry Science. On behalf of Wisenetics, I'd like to welcome our guest today. Our guest is Dr. Zachary Smith. He is an assistant professor of animal science and the supervisor of the Ruminant Nutrition Laboratory and Center at South Dakota State University in Brookings, South Dakota. Thanks for joining us today, Zachary.
Hey, Adam, it's really a pleasure to be here. I want to apologize getting started. I think I caught the cold crud when I just got back from Brazil, and the whole family was sick, and just kind of getting over it. But I'll try my hardest. I do like to talk, so we should be okay.
There we go. It's all good. It's all good. If you wouldn't mind, introduce yourself to the audience, give us your background, and then also what it is you're working on there at South Dakota State.
Zach Smith here. Originally, I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas. When I was 5 years old, my dad worked for Cisco Foods, and a new opportunity arose, and he moved the whole family to Central Florida. So I'm the fifth of six, born after my folks were 40. I like to think that my little brother and I were the highlight of their twilight. And so we really had an interesting upbringing, chasing dad around his career. Orlando was a great place to be a young child. I grew up going to the parks and swimming in lakes and going to the beach. About the time I was finishing up eighth grade, though, dad had an opportunity to move. It was really the only kids left for me and my little brother Barney Mac to West Texas. And it was culture shock, man. I didn't know what I was getting into. And so we packed up, moved from Orlando, and got into a 2-bedroom rent house in Sweetwater, Texas. Now, Sweetwater, Texas, it's not a lot of sweet water. It's a dry desert area. And got out there. First thing I wanted to do, though, was get involved in FFA. So took ag class, got some chickens, and started my career as a livestock production person. That turned into sheep, pigs, and things of that nature. Was fortunate enough to be on in a good FFA chapter. It was really small. We all had to be involved, and so I elected to be on the livestock judging team. And my whole life, I wanted to be a livestock show judge, and so I was trying to set myself up for that type of career. Ended up going to Texas Tech University. Wasn't too far from home. Uh, Pretty easy to get into if you were an average student, and I got enrolled in the animal science course. Turns out it's a bit of a legacy. My mother was a Texas Tech alumni, and my great uncle was actually an animal husbandry alumni of that department. And so it was really kind of a cool place to get to learn a craft close to home. And from there, was a part of many judging teams. Went on and got an MS degree with Dr. Rob Pritchard at South Dakota State. And the best days of my life, man. I was a single 22-year-old, just learning. And look back on those days, it really wasn't that long ago. And some of the really the toughest, most awesome, and hardest times of my life. Ended up moving back to Lubbock to work on a PhD with South Dakota native Brad Johnson. Dr. Johnson had taught my feeds and feeding class in high school, and I didn't do really good. And then told him I wanted to go to grad school. He looked at me and said, "Good luck." And we started a friendship that day, and still to this day, very close. Very fortunate, married to a gal I went to high school with. We've got 2 kids, and we've made South Dakota our home for the past 5 years. So Cheyenne spent 6 winters in South Dakota. We don't count years, we count winters.
That's right.
Yeah. When it comes to my professional career, though, and so that's kind of my life story. Florida boy, ended up in an academic position in a state with more cows than people. But it's perfect, right? Because if you got to practice your craft, you might as well do it where the best cattle in the world live. And I personally feel like that's South Dakota. So to move into the professional career, it was I don't know, March of 2018, and I need to find a job. And it's a very stressful deal. I knew I wanted to probably be in an academic position because I really enjoyed the coming up with an idea, a random question, a thought, and seeing that through into, a new recommendation. And I got lucky because these things don't pop open very often. I was fortunate enough that Pritchard had moved on from the university and there was a position with my name written on it. Convinced Cheyenne that we should move up here. And what we started in July of 18 was really some of the best times of our lives. We get to hang out with young, moldable professionals that are, at least at my point in my career, very similar in age, right? We are into the same pop culture things and we understand and watch the same TV and consume the same social media. But been very lucky that all those students have, taken me as a mentor and helped me grow too, right? They treat me with a lot of respect and we work really hard and have a lot of fun. So we've been here 6 years. Got kids born in South Dakota, kids raised in South Dakota. They grew up saying Coke, and for Coca-Cola it was Coke. And I'm a little concerned Maddox is going to start calling it Pop if I stay here much longer.
With its advanced industry-specific capabilities, Best Mix software empowers nutritionalists and formulators to optimize material allocation, manage recipes, and ensure data confidence for informed decision-making. By providing a comprehensive solution that integrates real-time data and strategic planning tools, Best Mix enables you to do the job efficiently and precisely. Focus on your core job and let Best Mix do the rest.
Yeah, I'm originally from Kansas, and my kids are all born and raised here in North Carolina. And sometimes they say stuff with an accent that I'm unfamiliar with. Well, I'm familiar with it now, but it didn't come from my household.
Oh yeah, dude, in that dialect across regions, you're in the Bojangles chicken capital of the world.
That is correct.
And for sure, the deep twang is a thing. And dude, it's something still to this day that I don't know if I can't shake it. I don't know. It's just the way we carry and draw things out, but a little lazy, easier going.
First time I remember taking my kids, and I mean it wasn't the first time, but we went somewhere. We had to stop for breakfast, and we stopped at a Bojangles, so free advertisement for Bojangles, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I ordered my breakfast, and I'm from Kansas, so that thing's gonna have bacon on it. It's gonna have sausage. It's gonna have a breakfast meal.
Now you got a chicken biscuit with honey butter.
I was like, that. I'm sorry. I like their chicken too, but it's breakfast time, and they're like, well,
I'm a beef cattle scientist, but I do miss delicious chicken tenders because they don't exist up here. I will say we probably rank number one in the world though for gas station fried gizzards, and I do like that. So
there you go.
Yeah, gut bombs, right?
So what are your primary focuses that you're actually working on in your research program there?
I think, and man, this question. So the question has changed over the years, right? Because when I was finishing up my PhD, I did a lot of molecular biology stuff, and I thought I wanted to do that. And I never ever was very good in graduate school of this. This is really the airline question. What do you do? And I'm like,
right.
Man, I feed cows and I have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
That's not what I do. And so I've worked on this. So here I am 6 years later, and hopefully I'm probably a goofy response because I wake up every day and I have fun. But what do? I focus on management of cattle really from the moment they're weaned until they're hanging upside down on a hook. It's a pretty wide area of beef cattle science to be involved in. I think of myself as really a beef cattle production scientist. And so if it fits in that realm, really from even pre-weaning, management of calves pre-weaning until they are hanging upside down at the beef packer, we really focus our research portfolio in that space. I'd say half of the work we do is newly weaned balling calf in growing studies, and the last half we do is finishing management, nutrition strategies, growth technologies. South Dakota is really unique, though. We export a lot of cattle to other states, and so one of my goals here is to to convince stakeholders that we can be a top cattle finishing state. And I'm really fortunate. We've got 2 feedlots here in the system. One of the feedlots, we take balling calves every fall, um, run those through a receiving trial growing study, and those matriculate into a finishing study. And then down in Beersford, there's another offsite station, and this is really a special place. It's called the Southeast Research Farm. And 50, so it was probably 62 years ago, actually. I get lost on 1960s. I still think like the 50s or 50 years ago. In the 1960s, the farm board, a group of farmers came together and bought some land. And the goal is an experiment farm to look at agronomic practices in southeastern South Dakota. What they also did is they built a feedlot and a swine finishing unit. And so working down in Beersford, we really get to work into integrating crop and livestocking systems, which is what South Dakota, Northwest Iowa Farmer Feeder does. They're crop farmers with a beef cattle enterprise, and they use that cattle feeding enterprise to market home-raised feedstuffs as opposed to being tied to any one market. Right. And so I really get this opportunity to do all the different post-weaning management systems in South Dakota. We use these facilities to facilitate all the different types of cattle that we have in the state. Now, when it comes to research, this is actually really funny. My brain, as I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of people like me, is like a ping pong ball. Okay, I'm not Albert Einstein in that I've got one or some overarching goal. Probably never going to change the world, right? But I've always tried to synthesize all the things around me to ask a goofy question, maybe one that nobody else would, and develop a series of experiments to help answer that question. So I'll give you an example. This was integrating crop and livestock systems. It was one of the first studies we did, and really all the research has a story because it was something we saw driving down the road, or something I heard on farm radio, or even something my wife was like, "What about this?" I said, "Wow, that's great." So story one, feeding cattle in South Dakota over winter's tough, is why we did a bedding study. We'll tie back to that one later.
Sure.
But the one when I really thought, okay, this is some systems-based research, and I'm not trained to do this, was the spring of 2019, and our team was heading down to the Midwest Animal Science meeting in Omaha, which is really a pig meeting. We try really hard to have a lot of beef people there, and we do. It's a great meeting. Don't miss it ever. And when we left Brookings on March 5th, I'm this approximately, there was snow. Dakota Dunes, last town in South Dakota. Dakota City is the first town in Nebraska, kind of right there where all the states meet. Just snow packed. 3 days later, this was Monday morning. Wednesday, we're driving back. There is no snow 20 miles north of Sioux Falls. It all melted. And I'm sure everybody remembers that spring and the devastation it brought to Nebraska in regards to snow melt. Yep. Well, it really messed a lot of things up here in regards to planting. We didn't get crops planted. We were delayed planting. All these things were occurring. It was one of those years, thank God we had thank the Lord we had some really key stakeholders that spoke with the right people. We were able to prevent plant acres as corn silage early, and we were able to make feed to feed our livestock. But some other things happened is later on in the fall, it was time to harvest the crop. It was raining again, and it was too wet to run. All the canopy was built up, and it was too wet to run our corn silage choppers. Okay. We needed to harvest forage. We weren't going to take it as a corn crop. The next year I'm sitting around and I'm like, well, I hear about all this kernel processing. I know most of the guys that my stakeholders don't have a kernel processor attached on their grandpa's old silage harvester. And what happens if you can't get into the field early enough to harvest it and it dries down? So we conducted a study about the influence of kernel processing and delayed corn silage harvest in cattle-fed finishing diets, right? And this was I'm not sitting at my desk thinking of these things. We're just driving around and hearing questions. It was a great study. Unfortunately, kernel processing didn't make a difference in the finishing diets. And this was a tough pill to swallow because it's a very big recommendation from most beef cattle nutritionists. I think they got it from the dairy industry. Um, and then when I had to go tell my colleagues in the industry like this stuff, they're like, Zach, that's not true. There's no way that's possible. Well, I think it is. And then when you start asking them and layering the questions about why it is possible, they come around. They still don't use it as a recommendation, but I still feel good about the science. Now, when we went and did it in growing cattle, where we fed it as a larger proportion of the diet as corn silage, of course, kernel processing made a difference. But when we fed it at 20% of diet dry matter and it was 10% of wet corn that was cracked or not, it didn't make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
These types of things are, it's always peeling the onion layer back. That's one example. I was very fortunate early on to get involved with some hybrid rye work. We're
Okay.
really hurting in the Dakotas for a third crop. Wheat's been king for years. We've been a corn and soybean state, and we do some wheat, small grain acres, or wheat or oats. There's this opportunity now for us to take this new germplasm of rye that's hybridized and that actually has a trait bred into it. It's a super pollinating trait. And so it actually has a lower risk for ergot.
Okay. Sure.
Yield on it's really outstanding too. And so we started working on it right away. Figured out, that can't do complete replacements, but you can do a third of the grain. And then we started working on, well, it takes different processing equipment. So what if we don't process it, but it's cheap? What time of the year can we feed it? And a variety of things. And so my first rye workshop, there was probably 10 people there. Last March, we did a rye workshop, and there was 2 days of 100 people. And so it's really cool to see something from not big deal to where we're getting some ground. And so that's the best part about this place. So our ideas, um, I don't know what we're going to do 6 months from now, because I'm waiting to hear the next thing that needs to be answered. And I've been really the good thing about my job is the flexibility of being able to use all these pins. So I don't know how I do at a place where I had to plan, look ahead, share, all those things. Works out good for my current situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you bet. Once again, my guest today is Dr. Zach Smith, an assistant professor of animal science in South Dakota State University. I was actually going to ask you about that, and it might be interesting. We've talked with other folks in the past that have done different species worth of research, and we're always approaching it kind of from the feeding side, but I kind of like getting into that side of it too. And obviously, if we're doing poultry research, everything requires planning to get this trial set up and to go get the funding and do all that kind of stuff. But when we think about doing the work, and this is something I think is always something I like to share with folks in the industry that are waiting for the work to come out. We're feeding poultry. Maybe we need 14 days if I want to do something on just looking at chick starter, or if I'm going to feed all the way out on broilers, I need 49, 56 days at the most. If I'm going to do turkeys, I need 20 weeks or so. Breeders are a year. That's the longest that we get. Swine, again, depends on if we're doing nursery. How does that impact when you're doing beef cattle work and it's something that, okay, now this animal takes a while to grow? How does that change how you approach the kind of things you decide to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I start the thought process of what are we capable of, I think as an academic researcher, you really need to be able to tell people what you're not capable of, right?
Yeah, it's a good point.
We're not going to don't come here for a health study, right? I got 8 head in a pen. If one dies, that's 12% mortality. That's not realistic. And so even, man, all these binomial yes, no type answers, we're not suited for that type of work. I'm going to be able to, I'm a feed 'em and weigh 'em scientist, and I wear that badge so proudly because I treat feed 'em and weigh 'em research like rocket science.
Mm-hmm.
There is an art to it. Okay, and so we're looking at things like productive responses. And so I know, I got in my head, well, how many replicates do we need? I know how many animals we're going to put into a pen, right? I only put 8 in a pen. Some people are like, why don't you put 15? Well, the within pin standard deviation has an appreciable tightening when I go from 6 to 8 head. But it doesn't get any tighter until I get over 20 head. And you put 20 head in a pen, they poop more, you got to clean more work on a weigh day. And so understanding my limitations, all those things become important. We've done a lot of studies, man. I need about a 6-month lead time typically to put it all together as pins and stuff work out. But yet there's things that I want to do all the time. And I've tried to do some short ones, some long ones. Most of the work that we're doing, really though, we do the funded studies, we write grants, we get money, we do sponsored research, and people come and have us test their products. Those pay bills. The fun stuff we do though are the odds and ends where we have a few extra pins and we run a study over 2 years and we ask the question that no granting agency really cares about.
Yeah.
And then when we go and present the data, people are like, who funded that? And I'm like, the rainy day account at the Ruminant Nutrition Center. And so those things, I do get jealous that sometimes y'all's turnover and interval is quicker, but that really just means do y'all do as many of us studies a year and take more time off? I guess I just get a little more relaxed time because I couldn't imagine starting a new study every 60 days. There'd be too much data and working to manage the thing. So yeah, ours take, we might get 6 to 10 studies done a year.
Sure.
And sometimes I got to make tough calls. I'll have a company call and they're like, Zach, we need a 2x2 factorial. So 4 treatments and we want 12 replicate pins. Well, that's every pin at the feedlot. And I cannot tie up every pin to one question when we've got, 4 grad students to train. And so we've made a lot of passes over the years. I think we need more facilities, perhaps. I've got great facilities. Things that concern me moving forward, though, in an administrative role of managing these different units is actually labor.
Yeah.
It's problematic. I mean, these experiment station old school research technicians, they're all 65 now. They're aging out quickly. They're aging right along with our infrastructure. And so I'm really trying to look 30,000 foot of what the future looks like. It's going to be a lot of different things. It might be part-time employees, and I need to streamline processes. These are things that keep me up at night, man. Yeah, so we do make decisions based upon pin space availability, ability to train students, but we enjoy science so much, man. Like we have not whittled ourselves into that we are only going to work on heat stress or only going to work on marbling. We're a broad spectrum, which might actually be a problem because then I have trouble telling people what I'm an expert at. I'm not very good at a lot. I know a few things, right? It's fun.
There you go. No, it's amazing how much some of that, all that stuff dovetails. I for one fully endorse and agree with the idea of, you go do the work, whether you, like you said, it be sponsored or service related or however you want to call that, or things related to grants. I speaking as, for me personally, I'm primarily an extension focused person, so I don't have a lot of research appointment. And I didn't want one when I got here because I'm in feed milling, and like I'm gonna go get grant from who?
Yeah.
Like, and so that's probably not where that's gonna come.
You got to collaborate with the guy.
That's right. But I really love that idea of, hey, I'm gonna go do the stuff that makes the money, so that I can go I'm going to take the money though, and I'm going to go do the stuff I want to do. I'll do the stuff you need me to do, but I'm going to take your money and go do the stuff I want to do. And that's where the cool stuff comes from.
Oh man, not every one of the granting agencies, they're great to us, but they also have things that they want answered, right? And you need to fit your question into theirs. And so, a creative way that I've thought of things. All right. We're talking about, maybe it's something as simple as, there's some NRCS conservation innovation grant. They want some on-farm trials. I'm not very good at on-farm trials, but maybe it's something looking at, they want to look at effluent or wastewater from a feedlot. All right. And how that impacts lower terrestrial species. Well, the spin for Zach on it is, and I hope no one's listening, I really want to know the difference in limit feeding a corn grower versus ad-libbing a forage grower. It's going to automatically change manure output. And so I'm interested in the production responses and the agronomic principles and all that stuff. But the granting agency just wants to know how many tons of manure I generate in a feeding period. And so the whole grant is manure output. But on the backside, it's layered in about, okay, how do we use grain to grow cattle when forage is expensive?
Yeah.
That's the thought process. My colleague, first PhD student, his name's Dr. Warren Rushi. So Warren, and I, Warren makes me look a heck of a lot smarter than I am. So Warren was born, I was born August 28th, 1990. I won't steal my identity. And that was the day Warren was leaving South Dakota to go start an MS degree with Dr. Larry Cora.
There you go.
Warren has a whole career in extension, working at home, came back to the university, and he had a midlife crisis. He said, I started a PhD when I was 48, and I was his advisor. And Warren always says, Zach, we got to skate to where the puck's going. And so that's gotten us into some things like we've had complete replacement of distillers grains with soybean meal.
Okay.
When I told people I was going to do that, they're like, cattle won't eat 20% dry matter inclusion of soybean meal. Well, they did, but we tried it, and that was such an out of bounds idea at the time that when I went to the Minnesota Soybean Council, I said, hey, I'm going to overfeed crude protein, but I'm envisioning that y'all have so much soybean meal that you got to give it away, and I'd rather feed it to cattle than put it in a landfill. And that might not ever happen, but those were kind of the crazy ideas that nobody else was going to do it. Thank God. Gosh, they gave us the money to do it.
I think you alluded to it earlier. We should talk about your even if it's not necessarily feed related. We should talk about your winter bedding trial, because as you told me before, that was one of your wife's ideas, and you need to be able to tell her that her idea made on a podcast, even if it only gets listened to by 100 people.
So Cheyenne, my wife, she grew up in West Texas, went to the same high school. She had goats growing up, showed 4-H FFA goats. And she has this a keen sense of being able to read people and livestock. And she asked one day, we bed the cattle, but she had, I don't know if we were driving around in the country or she saw some cattle that weren't bedded. She's like, why don't they bed those? Those cattle don't look too happy. I said, well, sweetie, bedding's it's a chore. It's expensive. You have to plan ahead of time to accumulate the bedding that you need to apply over the winter. And she said, you should do a bedding study. I was like, oh, that's so silly. I don't think it'll matter. But I needed something to do. And I had a grad student showing up. And so January of 19, we did do a with and without bedding study. When we did it, we probably didn't do it all right, because the non-bedded cattle, so these were cattle on concrete pens.
Mm-hmm.
There's concrete open lot. The stocking density of those cattle was about 68 square foot. You could probably take them down to 50 square foot per head on an open lot concrete with the slope we had.
Okay.
So they weren't overstocked. But we didn't scrape those pins out, and the pins really got out of condition on the non-bedded. So I'm not sure if it's as extreme as what we saw, but we didn't tend to those pins at all. We started putting the bedding out, though, and on day 35, I weighed them, and they weighed 36 pounds more. Holy moly, this is crazy. They held on to that until the very end. Actually was able to ship those cattle a month before. And so that was really, Todd, you got to do a study that gets traction, right? So I wasn't coming in here on a first study for a new faculty member. Doesn't need to be testing some minute thing to change the world. It was big effect size differences, right? And that's what we did. And got a lot of miles off that. I've talked about that work all across the North and South America. The coolest thing ever, though, this happened last summer, was visiting Canada. It was the first time I'd ever seen one of the recommendations from our work actually being used in practice. And dude, that was humbling.
Yeah, it's always really cool.
Oh, you're like, whoa. And I was like, so where'd y'all hear about that? They're like, oh, some paper from South Dakota. They didn't even know it was me. And you just sit there and you just keep your mouth shut. You're like, wow, man, what we do does matter, and people are reading our stuff, and it does make a difference. So the bedding study, thanks to my great wife, I got to be honest with you, it was a factorial study. Actually, it was with and without bedding. My first dumb idea was using an implant with an antimicrobial pellet, but that was when I was still too ignorant to know that I didn't need to be doing yes no outcomes. All right, early on in my career, going to change the world. And so we dropped that component, but just things that you learn along the way. uh, Ended up not using that implant because I went back and I was reading some implant symposium, and Abe Turgeon back in the 90s, he said, don't be doing this kind of stuff at a small university. I was like, oh, well, he knew 20 years ago. I better not try to pull this off here today because I think I'm smarter.
Before we close it out, you want to talk just a little bit about steroidal implants? As I'm sure you're painfully aware, as is everybody in our entire food animal industry. You're the only you guys are the only ones that actually get to use steroids. I had a conversation just this weekend as I was doing something different, and overheard over here in a group that was around me about, yeah, you got to be careful of the chicken you buy because the feed them steroids. I was like, I was going to stay out of this conversation until you said that, and now I got to go be. I'm not even the chicken guy, but I am the feed guy, and so I know darn well which we can and cannot put in.
Yeah.
But I know that that's something that you've worked on and have actually been asked to speak on as to what it's there for, what it does, and whether it's safe. So maybe we go viral here. I don't know.
All right. So in my whole career, man, I guess you can kind of tell we beat to our own drum, and we go where we follow the lightning path. Okay. Someone told me one time, they said, Zach, follow the path of least resistance. I'm not lazy, but we're not going to fight and claw to make ourselves hurt. We're going to follow the path of least resistance and go boom. That is one of the most profound things I ever heard. When I was sitting in working on my PhD, I'd done a lot of work with trace minerals and stress calf or newly weaned calf management. But I had an opportunity to work with Brad Johnson and Robbie Pritchard. And so the whole implant story is so tiny. So you could probably see a bar graph right there. Do you see that?
Got it. Yep.
Those are posted there. Those were from a study done at Texas Tech in the early 90s. Rod Preston was working on a product with Hurst Russell, and it was the Revlor implant. This was the Revlor 200 implant. Before it came to market, these were in the front page of an old study binder that was covered in dust at the top of the feed mill.
Yep.
And I don't think those data had ever been seen by anybody. And actually, profound when I got in there and started looking at the feed conversion, the gain responses, because it was with Trenbolone, with estrogen, or the combination or none. And they had the serum urea nitrogen. And that graph chart right there really has molded the way I see how these technologies work. So steroidal implants, a little bit about the history. The first one that was ever approved was diethylstilbestrol.
There you go.
These aren't on the street anymore, but they haven't sold these since the 70s. This is a diethylstilbestrol implant. And so I kind of got a little homage to all the growth technologies up there on my top shelf.
Perfect.
But DES, fellow by the name of Wise Burroughs. He's known by most students of ruminant nutrition. Wise Burroughs is credited for the urea fermentation potential of the metabolizable protein system. But he was riding on a plane from Ames to somewhere in the Great Lakes region. And he heard these guys talking about a product that they had fed to turkeys or chickens, and that it really increased the breast weight. And it piqued his interest. It turns out it was diethylstilbestrol. Turns out the people that were on the plane, it was Eli Lilly folks. Eli Lilly's animal company is Elanco. Sure, I'm not sure if anyone's ever it's not known by a lot of people. I'm sure a lot of people do know, but Eli Lilly Animal Company is Elanco. Right. Dr. Burroughs said, hey, I want to get my hands on some of that. And they actually brought to market oral DES followed by steroidal implants of diethylstilbestrol. And the graduate student at the time for Dr. Burroughs was a fellow by the name of Rod Preston. Dr. Preston had an outstanding career. if you read the Beef magazine, you have his feed tables, right? Keep 2 copies at my desk because those are the tabular values that I use. Probably because I'm slightly related to him. All right, not from a genetic component, but through my academic career. So Rod Preston was Robbie Pritchard's postdoc advisor at Texas Tech. Preston, when Pritchard showed up to Washington State, he had long hair, and Preston didn't give him an assistantship. By the time Pritchard left, Preston got Pritchard to go to Texas Tech with him and never made him get a haircut. So it speaks to the kind of person that Dr. Pritchard was. He was incredible. And Robbie trained with Dr. Preston at Tech during a postdoc and then came up here to South Dakota and started his career. When Robbie left, I took Pritchard's job. So I'm one generation removed from Preston, who worked with Burroughs. And then Brad Johnson, my PhD advisor, he worked with Bill Dayton and Pete Anderson during his MS degree, ended up getting a PhD with Bill Dayton, and was one of, I got the page bookmarked, the 1996 journal right over there where Johnson was on the front cover. And he gave a Revlor S implant and really looked at how the effects on protein accumulation and changing in fat deposition during the initial 42-day period post-implantation. So I had all this history of implant experts in my pedigree, and I'm sitting down there in Lubbock, and I'm probably going to end up doing some cell culture biology work because that's what Johnson does. And he had a sponsored project come up with Merck, and he said, Zach, you want to do this implant study? I said, sign me up. And I immediately became obsessed with implants. And I said, you know what? This is going to be the one thing I'm an expert at is implants. And so I studied a lot, and that's where I started working. So steroidal implants have been used since 1956, stilbestrol. And right after that, Synovex S came out. We still use Synovex S today. It's a combination estrogen progesterone implant. So all these implants in general contain estrogen for the most part, in combination with a progestin or an androgen. The progesterone estrogen implants are typically lower potency implants. We use those in cattle on forage-based diets or in a growing situation. And we use the combination of a synthetic androgen, that's trenbolone acetate and estradiol, for our finishing phase implants. Now, when it comes to the safety of these products, and I've had the opportunity to, one time my qualifying exam for Brad Johnson was, he sent me to the World Anti-Doping Association to talk to all the WADA lab directors about the potential risk of exposure to trenbolone acetate or products from farmed animals. That was pretty interesting because those were all analytical chemists. And if you've ever dealt with an analytical chemist, they're not biologists. And was sitting there, and these were hormone chasers. And it was kind of a tough pill to swallow because they still didn't believe the risk. They had an agenda in their brain. They didn't like beef production or the use of hormones. And I'm literally sitting there showing them the residues, and the risk for human exposure were so small. That was tough, right? It's like a scientist arguing with scientists, and then they're getting their personal involvement and entailed into it. So that was kind of tough.
It was a heck of a prelim, though.
Yeah, it was a heck of a prelim, man. And so went down there, and then when I got up here to Brookings, still really tried to understand the biology of how they work and how they influence growth and how the receptors change over time with repeated hormone exposure, and why sometimes if we give more, we don't get as much as if we gave just a little less, and all those things. And so I was having a great career in this, and then we got new rules dropped on us about we can't do repeated reimplantation, and so it's actually really made me have to think more about the best way to apply this technology. And so steroidal implants, safety factor, most peptide hormones are not orally active. Synthetic estrogen is, synthetic androgens are. Some estrogen-like molecules can be orally active, but they're really, for the most part, destroyed. And the consumption of the risk for residue exposure is so low. And so we have things called tolerance levels and maximum residue levels. And so the tolerance level is really worst case scenario. Give an implant, kill them 2 days later. The maximum residue level is what we think would be in there after the expected life of that product. And even with the data applied to the tolerance level, the risk for residues and exposures are so low, and they had to be, or they would have never got approved, right? And so they assign a safety factor of 100 below the dose in which we would have human physiological changes. And so there's safety net after safety net on the application, and they really are the greatest tool we have in beef cattle production. So when Rob Pritchard started at SDSU in 1983, we had 33% more cows in the prairie, and we produce just as much beef today as we did then with 33 fewer cows. And it's been genetics, it's been feed management, it's been growth technology. That's the one technology, man. It's a 20-to-1 ROI every time. Now, there are some bad parts about it. If you don't know how to use them right, you can screw up quality grade, right? So if I give them the big old potent implant first day in the feedlot when they're eating 0.75% of body weight, yeah, we're going to tank marbling. And that's for a whole nother day, dude, because we could talk about the flow of nutrients and how marbling's this intrinsic component of growth, and subcutaneous fat is only put on when we feed cattle to eat more than their buffalo cousins did 1,000 years ago. There's a lot to it, right? But those are the things that keep your brain rolling.
Well, and I think you spoke to kind of one of the things and I think it's a good thing to finish up on is one thing that's the hardest for us to get out there sometimes is that idea of there are good tools. They wouldn't be tools for the most part. I mean, 99.9% of the time, they wouldn't be good tools if they weren't, completely safe. And that 0.1% of the time,
Yeah.
maybe we found something out way later and then it goes away. But most of the time, that's not the case. And if we don't use these tools, and if we try to do it like, in the dark ages, I'm not sure who's going to choose not to eat, but it's not going to be me.
Yeah. And in the dark ages, most of the illegal use of growth compounds occur in countries where there is zero tolerance.
Right.
They stick them in the tails, disuse. Somebody told me one time, and I kind of believe this, man. Um, domestic beef production, and you hear this every day, 10 billion people by the year 2050. It's increased 10% since I was in school. The U.S., we're going to play a role in that, right? We're going to help feed the world. But I don't think it's going to be totally fall on our shoulders to feed the entire world, especially, beef cattle. A lot of the work I've been doing that looks at improving, efficiency, it's oftentimes they just eat a little less, they grow the same, but we don't get them as fat, right? And so
Yeah.
I end up producing a sub-quality product because to put on a kilogram or a pound of fat takes 2.25 times the amount of calories as it does lean tissue. And so a lot of these things that enhance efficiency, right? And I get so tired of the greenwashing of sustainability because every study I've ever designed is designed to pick up a 5% difference in feed efficiency.
Yeah,
I don't
right.
measure methane because I don't have the tools to do that
Right.
in my disposal. But we could run the risk of creating a sub-value commodity, right? This cow converts this cellulosic biomass into this delicious, nutrient-dense commodity that benefits mankind. And I want to make sure that we're producing the highest quality product, because in beef cattle, the quality of the product is really what drives what a consumer is willing to pay for it. I was at Midwest PM ASAS last week, and they talked about the problems they're having with the loin. The biggest cut of meat on the pig, nobody wants to eat it because there's no fat inside of it.
Right.
Those are problems I don't want to see ourselves get into. And so for me, the U.S. beef production has 25 million units a year getting their heads cut off and harvested. If we're going to do that, do we want to produce a bunch of Ford Focuses or Ford Excursions?
Yeah.
I'm going to make a bunch of Ford Excursions, right? And that's the beauty of the U.S. beef system. We really live in the best place in the world. Most other people raising beef cattle, they're produced in a very small micro environment. You go to the Europe to the UK, it's very temperate.
Yeah.
You go down to Brazil, it's subtropical and tropical.
Yeah.
In the United States, we go from subtropical to tundra.
Yeah.
And our beef cattle system works, right? It's a bunch of little players and segmentation, and we're all little players in this whole thing that creates this monster.
Yeah.
And so I think it's the beautiful thing about the beef industry. Our nutrient requirement for cattle model, our NASEM, it gets used from the equator to the tundra.
Yeah.
Most other countries have estimates for animal requirements from a very specific region. And so I really think that's why the U.S. is the global leader. This did not start post World War II. What you and I are benefiting from was some really smart people in the 1860s that enacted the Morrill Act, and then brought aboard the Hatch Act, and then the Smith-Lever Act. And we're really just standing on these shoulders of giants. And I don't think the rest of the world's figured that out. They're not going to be able to come in and weasel their way into this production system, because we're on year 160 of some of the best work and collaborative efforts amongst a union of states. Makes us pretty special. So I think about the other parts of the world, and think, they can come over here and try to steal our secrets, try to do what we're doing. I got my Uncle Corky's peanut brittle recipe, and I'm not very good at making it. Other people can get his recipe, but their standards for peanut brittle are down here, and ours are up here. So peanut brittle, story of life.
I think that's all incredibly well said, and I think your points are right on. That's why the system was built. The system was built to develop this work, to develop this science, and to get better, not to not do things just because it's not the way it used to be done or whatever.
Exactly.
It's time for our famous three.
Let's finish our conversation up. We always ask folks a few questions to kind of tie everything back together. So the first one is, in your particular area, in your discipline being, as you mentioned earlier, the kind of the entirety of the beef cattle growth production, what's a resource if somebody would come to you and say, hey, if there's one resource that I need to go look at that would be the best place for me to go to keep up to date with what's going on in beef cattle research, development, things like that, what's one that you really like? Could be a periodical, journal, website, whatever the case may be.
Okay, so you want to know what's going on in the beef industry? Just go. You go read the Feedlot magazine or things like that. I want to preface this story. A lot of the good information that I read is actually from like the pig producer publications or Horde's Dairymen, right? Totally outside of my discipline, because I get to see what other people are doing in different animal husbandry practices. I'm like, oh, well, what if I did that over here? So I like to read other species a lot.
Okay.
I don't review journal articles for pigs, or dairy work, but I do like to read Horde's Dairymen. I do like to peruse the Journal of Dairy Science. One good strategy, I think, and this is like drinking. It's how I take my consume my news. Right, every morning I get up and I read the headlines. Every morning when I get to the office, I hit up all of the key journals in the discipline. TAS, JAS, Applied Animal Science, they actually don't have a first look. Animal Feed Science and Technology, a few of those others, and I look at the articles in press, because it's really easy for me to go through and read 3 new titles that came in overnight and see if that interests me, pull the first look paper, put it in the deal, read it, and then go back and find the final print. And so the way I control so it's not just a water hose of the monthly review.
Yeah.
I try to take it in small bits. So every morning I go through the 4 journals that I seek out information for. What are my colleagues working on that I didn't hear about at the last annual meeting?
Right.
Other than that, I think being, understanding what's going on in the world, right? Those things are important. It's the livestock industry is not a domestic industry. It's a global industry. And so I like to read the news. When it comes to science, though, attending meetings, the journal periodicals from the society that I'm members of, And then a lot of popular press, man. I love reading popular press articles because they can be read in about 5 minutes. You get the idea and you move on, which is one thing I think when we communicate science is another thing we need to think about. It's like when I started this job, I'd read a paper for 5 hours. I didn't know what I was reading. Now I'm in there and I'm looking for one or two things and you know exactly where to go look. But I still sometimes think I missed the whole picture, or I have selection bias where I only read and retain the things that fit my preconceived notion, which is horrible. Um, I love every study when if we don't do an experiment and have like 20 more questions, uh, you screwed up. And like if it matches your preconceived notion, or the best is when it does the opposite of what you thought it was supposed to do, and then you really, really got to think about it. So my source of information is social media, uh, the web, searching the web. One thing that really excites me, and I don't know how to take it, is like, what are we going to do with these large language models and artificial
Hmm.
intelligence? Right? I think it's an outstanding tool to investigate, but still need the person with the PhD to confirm, or not even a PhD. You still need to read through it and check. And so I wonder, my grad student the other day told me, Zach, he's like, I put in all of the Preston feed tables into Chat GPT, and I was asking it to formulate diets for me to meet nutrient requirements. I said, Forrest, that's crazy. But if it happens, then all of a sudden all these companies are going to be, they're not going to have their feed formulations. I mean, it's just insane what has happened on my computer, man. When I write an email, I'm like, thank you. And then it says for your time, and I press tab.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm using it. I don't know how to feel about it. Um, Times are changing, dude. It's crazy.
No, but you're right. I mean, that's it's about trying to figure out, how to use those things, and then where to fit them in. And that I think that goes well into, and I'm going to kind of combine. We usually ask kind of two questions, but I'm going to kind of combine them into one, because I think based on your perspective, they might tail together. The first question is other resources that are outside your discipline that you've found useful, just kind of in your like professional development, but also folks that you have worked with and are working with now, have worked with in the past.
Yeah.
What are the things that you have seen from the way that they have, the things that they have done professionally that you've looked at and said, yes, that's what you emulate. It's a characteristic that they have, or it's a resource that they're not afraid to use, that has something that I've really grabbed on to, that I train my students and I tell them, look, this is something you got to do that may not be otherwise obvious to you.
Okay, and that's a great question, because we all of our probably styles, the who we are, is a function of the environment we were put into with our previous mentor. So my first mentor was probably my dad, my grandpa, and my
Right.
mother, right?
Yep.
They taught me the value of being honest and showing up and loving people, and you know being trying to be fiscally responsible, those things, right?
Hmm.
From a professional career, I had really great advisors, and obviously I'm biased, but they didn't do everything perfect, right? And I know I don't do everything perfect, and so I try to emulate a lot of the things they did, but also with my own spin. They all had great things to offer, and they all had things that if you had to go back and remake them, you would not have had that, right? And but part of getting to work with people like that is I think it's natural. Most people are competitive, and people have egos, and part of being working with other people is learning how to manage your own ego, but help use their ego and help them work with other people. So anything I've ever been a part of has actually been more of a team, right? We don't do anything on our own. So I use this old nice Southern guy, and I try to be friends with everybody. I don't want any enemies, and I'm friends with people that won't even talk to each other, but we're mutual friends. And so the people, what do you emulate? Man, it's like if you had good mentors, it's really freaking hard not to want to do identical to them.
Hmm.
Uh, and so have a good role model, do every be what you wanted them to be to you is what my dad always told me. He said, Zach, I want you, when you get it in your career, I want you to be the professor you always wanted. Well, what does
There
that
you go.
mean? Well, it means combining the things of all the great mentors I had in my whole life into one. And dude, I still suck at it. I mean, I'm learning every day. Just fortunate that if you get the right people who buy in, my mentors, they tell me to jump out of a tree and onto a bed of nails. I'm gonna say, do you want me to slide off or jump? Right? Because I trust them. I hope people look up to me like that one day.
That's fantastic. I 100% agree. Find the mentor, pick the things that matter, and then try to be that person of, okay, if I look up to mine, why did I? And I want people to look up to me just like that.
Right.
Again, my guest today has been Dr. Zach Smith. He is an assistant professor of animal science and the supervisor of the Ruminant Nutrition Laboratory and Center at South Dakota State University in Brookings, South Dakota. Zach, I had a really good time with this conversation. I appreciate you joining us.
It was fun. Hopefully we can catch up with each other outside of a screen, and might be at a national meeting or something along the way. But it was great to meet you, Adam. And
Yeah.
the guy that hired me out of my first department head in grad school was a North Carolina State fellow, Joe Cassidy.
Okay.
He was the department head that hired me, and now he's the dean. And so I went to grad school with three gals from North Carolina. So I got a little bit of that in my pedigree, I guess, as well. We're all way closer related than we actually think.
It's not that many degrees of separation. I agree.
I think it's like 2 or 3, man.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know you till today.
There you go. That's how it goes. Thanks very much. I appreciate the conversation.
Well, I appreciate it, Adam, and thanks for letting me join the podcast.
You bet. Once again, this has been the Feed Science Podcast. I'm Adam Fairnolds from North Carolina State University on behalf of Wise and Ethics. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.